All right, we've got a good number of people joining us and still trickling in, but I'll go ahead and get started because we're at 9:30. Um, Thanks so much everyone for joining us today. I'm Chloe with the Tri-County Regional Energy Network, and today we have Michelle and Andy from Inbalance Green Consulting presenting on regenerative design and practice. This training is being recorded, and the slides and the recording will be shared with you in the next few days. If you have any questions during the presentation, just add them to the chat and we'll get to them as we can. We are going to be having time for questions at the end as well. So if you have any larger questions or more specific questions, you can save them till then. All right, and then before we get started, I will share a little bit about who we are as the Tri-County Regional Energy Network. We are a collaboration between the Tri-Counties, so that's San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties. And we're funded by ratepayer dollars that we all pay into in our utility bills through the public goods charge. The benefit of being ratepayer funded is that there is no cost to those we serve. And as a regional energy network, we are able to return these dollars back to our local economy, which has historically missed out on a lot of these funds. You can go to the next slide, Michelle. Thanks. 3CRN is currently offering 6 programs that are focused around 3 service areas. These include incentives, training, and technical assistance. Today's talk is being offered by our Building Performance Training Program. If you're interested in signing up for more events or learning more about these other programs, you can visit our website, 3c-ren.org. And with that, I'm going to pass things off to Andy and Michelle for today's training.
Great. Thank you so much. We're super happy to be here today. These are the learning objectives that will qualify this course, both for AIA learning units and as well as zero net carbon design for those of you who require those trainings for your architecture license. The system is now set up for you to, once you have attended this entire course, then you'll automatically be provided with a certificate that you'll be able to upload. As Chloe noted, the slides and the video recording will be available. So some of the slides that are maybe a little dense are so that you'll have information available later along with the links. So with that, it's regenerative design in practice. And we worded it this way because we'll talk a little bit about theory and where this comes from, but what we really want to share in this course is what regenerative design looks like as we're doing it. So some of the ideas will be new and inspiring and of interest in maybe something that you can incorporate. But a lot of the ideas are also going to be happily things you're already doing. So that's a lot of what we're trying to do is recognize where we're already have this awareness and where we can expand and grow. So the sequence of how we're going to be laying it out, Michelle and I will be hopping back and forth with each other on the different topics. Again, a little bit of the theory up front, and then talking about specific components of regenerative design. Regenerative thinking in action is just a couple case studies that's bringing several components together, and then a little bit of what's next at the end, how you can kind of process-wise get rolling with a thing. So let's open with moving from sustainable to regenerative design. Why are we having this conversation? So when we imagine our future built environment, I think we struggle, right? That there's kind of this potentially post-apocalyptic vision that we see a lot in the movies, the complete downfall of natural systems, of human systems, etc. And then there's also kind of on the flip side, people trying to re-envision what would a really balanced, lovely, healthful environment look like. And so these two images are kind of the contrast of that and maybe something else, right? That it's not like a one or the other. So as we shift our design and construction from these practices of trying to do less bad and then sustainable, like if everybody built like this, then we would be able to go into the future. But now we're shifting even more to healing, to restoration, to regenerating our environments, including how we build. And with that, I'll hand it back to Michelle.
Thanks, Andy. Nice to be here, everyone. Another way to sort of get at this broader way of thinking that goes along and process that goes along with regenerative design is taking into account a broader scope of work in some ways. These are two images that have emerged with regenerative design thinking in the last decade or so. On the left, it comes out of the Stockholm Resilience Center, and it's the planetary boundaries map. You'll see it's divided into sectors. And what they do is every year or two, they sort of assess where we are in each of these sectors. The green space in the middle denotes where we are operating within the capacity of the planet to be sustainable. And where we've moved into orange and red means we're exceeding the annual capacity of the Earth, of the planet, to sustain the practices that we are carrying out. And you can see there's climate change related land systems, fresh water, ocean water, acidification. This is the most recent map from 2023, so I think there'll be a new one soon. But you can see currently their assessment is that we're sort of working beyond the sustainable limits of what the planet can carry for humans and natural systems. And another way to look at it is on the right, there's this comes out of a work called Donut Economics. And that green donut is sort of a safe zone where inside the donut, human needs like water, food, housing are not being met. So being in that inside space is unhealthy for humans. And being outside the donut is sort of like on the left, we're pushing the limits of what the planet carrying capacity is. And so that's unhealthy as well. That's overshoot. And what we're trying to aim for is sort of a harmonious donut existence without the hole in the middle. Let's see if I can get this to go. So this is another way to just sort of get at what are we talking about when we say regenerative. I think a lot of us are pretty familiar with sustainable design, sustainable and environmental movements. Regenerative builds on that really and sort of pushes it to us all to consider what we do in a little bit broader perspective. Here we're defining it as describing processes, and that's an important word that support, replenish, and respect the resources of the sources of energy and resources. So it's very much a process as much as an outcome. And design obviously takes that sort of thinking in mind as designs are developed. You might be familiar with this diagram. We've used it in some other webinars, but it's sort of a classic inputs and outputs diagram. And if this is sort of business as usual, we might think about sustainable design and construction as reducing those inputs and I don't think that's working. Oh, reducing those inputs and outputs so that our impacts are smaller. Whereas, and here we're contrasting sustainable and regenerative. So if that's sustainable, we might think about regenerative then is building on that sort of lower, smaller footprint, but then building in ways to think about circular economies, reuse, and closing those loops of resources so that wastewater becomes usable water and waste material becomes usable material. And integral to this sort of perspective is net positive energy, water, and waste. As I'm not sure, we didn't actually ask our audience, Andy, how many folks are architects. But this is sort of from an architectural perspective, a lot of us project teams, we look at, well, where's the boundary of our project? And we draw a red line around the property line or maybe a lead boundary limits of construction. And that's a pretty standard way to think about, well, what are we going to affect with the project as we move forward? In a regenerative design mindset, there's perforations to that boundary. And so what's considered is, in addition to the land and the systems inside the boundary, is how do we relate biologically, ecologically, hydrologically, human relationships that perforate that boundary, that connect the inside of the boundary to the outside of the boundary. And that's sort of just a quick graphic on the right that everyone, you can see how it's just sort of a more dynamic perspective. And then we couldn't stop. We just loved all these graphics to show how we're looking at regenerative design. Just one more way to think about it. This is the theory portion of the webinar. Is sort of on more of a Cartesian way of looking at it. If we're looking at left to right, the red zone on the left is more energy required. A degenerating system is down on the left, and that's sort of like the most destructive kind of construction practices that we might see. And in this graphic, it says sort of conventional practice, just sort of barely legal. And as we move up the graphic and to the right, we can see the color moves toward green, and it denotes sort of less energy required, and a regenerative or a regenerating system is developed. So you move from conventional practice through green and sustainable, which is kind of at that neutral nexus in the middle, toward restorative, reconciliatory, and regenerative design. And one thing just to note here before I hand it off to Andy is the green dotted line is more or less a straight line and a trajectory, that we want to sort of strive for. But the curly Q line is also really important. It is not a linear process. It is very much an iterative process where gains are made, perspective is, reassessed. And so we kind of wind our way up, considering new information, bringing in new partners and stakeholders as we work our way toward sort of regenerative, energy efficient system. And I'll hand it over to Andy.
And this is, as an architect, to be able to broaden our thinking of what constitutes a project and the boundaries. So moving out of silos, in some ways, moving back out to some of the traditional roles of architects as communicators and educators, but this is also relevant to builders and engineers and building officials, that we're all kind of thinking in a more inclusive, collaborative kind of way. I like the UK architects declare. They have a kind of a grouping, a clustering of thinking about, if you're looking at place, that become a good ancestor is a core principle. And then co-evolve with nature. So looking at those natural systems and kind of a coming from a place of humility, humble entry as humans into that, and create a just space for people. So thinking about all people and a just place in that one. There's lots of players in this field right now, and so we're familiar with LEED in that kind of sustainable green building round, but they are also they, just like the building code, they evolve every few years. They've just launched LEED v5, and that includes more regenerative elements, and then there's a few around the world. The AIA has resources. Architecture 2030, which has been, since the 2000s, kind of one of those initial calls for net zero energy, and now going forward with positive energy. Living Future, honestly, has been the leader in our worlds in terms of regenerative design, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But just a side note here about Cal Green, our California Green Building Code. Back in 2011, started to look at the LEED scorecard, and that's how they organized the Cal Green requirements. Again, every 3 years, it gets a little bit more advanced, including now addressing embodied carbon. So maybe that will continue to expand towards regenerative design as well.
For now, we wanted to take a little bit closer look at one of those organizations, the Living Future, which formerly known as the International Living Future Institute, which was a bit of a mouthful. So they've abbreviated to Living Future, and their primary sort of founding program is the Living Building Challenge. It's a stringent certification, but what we like about it, for our purposes today, is it really lays out a framework for thinking about regenerative design. And I do mean a framework because in sort of preparing this presentation, it became really clear to Andy and I that there is no one framework for regenerative design. And that's an important way to sort of approach it, because we do all have sort of our own inputs and experiences that touch on the ideas here, and it's a participatory sort of process. The Living Building Challenge breaks itself, the framework is built on petals that roughly mirror some of the credit categories in LEED, if folks are familiar with that. Additionally, they include two important petals from my perspective, equity and beauty. And we put them here just to sort of touch on them. We will simplify these into 4 categories as we're moving forward and thinking about the components of regenerative design. But I think first and foremost, they put a really heavy emphasis on place, assessing the here, where the project is happening, both inside that border and more broadly, and not only the physical place, but the human relations in that place. Energy and water are treated really as striving for net positive outcomes on both of those. Materials is very much focused on toxins and safety, both for humans and for the planet. Health and happiness might correlate roughly with the IEQ credits in LEED, but it's very much the physical space as well as human relations and fostering community. And then we see the equity and beauty, which we'll touch on a little bit as we move through what we consider sort of components of regenerative design. Not going, there we go.
All right, so as Michelle mentioned, we've kind of simplified the categories. We'll just touch on a few examples. It's a lot of resources and opportunities. And so place, community, net positive water and energy, and materials is how we'll cluster them. As we go through, this is maybe your participation time. So if you look at some of these ideas, if you have other projects that you've seen or you've worked on that would help to inform the other, 25 folks on this call to be able to share what you know. So feel free to put those in the chat. We'll pause as we go a little bit and otherwise save some of those toward the end and be able to have some open discussion. It's a new field in a lot of ways. So I think there's lots of room for collaboration amongst all of you. So feel free to use the chat and we'll do some hand raising at the end as well. So folks can talk. So starting with place, one of the, as we've talked about, being sensitive to thinking not just at your site, but the entire context. Again, if we think about what we are used to doing anyway, right? We do a climate analysis. Where's the wind coming in? What's the solar access? What's the hydrology of the thing? Where's the groundwater table? So we are used to understanding some of those pieces, but what regenerative design asks us to do is go out a little bit wider and a little deeper into other areas. So kind of the ecology of the place, the human history. So how have people traditionally used this space? Have there been issues of displacement? What's been the natural habitats in there? And what are the things that we can layers that we can peel back, not just in the last, what was the last project, but what was there, 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, what is truly going on at this site. It's also looking at resiliency in terms of hazards, and this on the right is a map of potential flooding up in the Bay Area. Like what are as there is the impacts of climate change and sea level rise, where are the areas that could get inundated? And so then once we kind of do this broader, deeper analysis, then we respond. So here's one example of responding to an analysis that identified water inundation. So on the left is this park in China. These are kind of a sponge city. So it's this park, it's a travel area, but it's also one giant floodplain that creates kind of a controlled environment. So when there are monsoons, that there's a place for them to go. And so, and that kind of mimics some natural hydrology, right? That if you think of the Nile and the floodplains, that would happen there, that a lot of these areas would have natural seasonal flooding that would nourish the soils and be important for the health of the ecosystem for the rest of the year. On the right, small scale, this is Seattle. They have a lot of these green streets in terms of slow spread and sink the rainwater. So again, it goes back into the aquifer, seeps into the creeks, and creates a sustainable water flow system. And then even locally, right, we have to do that. So now we're just because of the Water Quality Control Board and rainwater management for stormwater. This is a project in Arroyo Grande, and you can't just dump rainwater in the streets, of course, anymore. We know that. And so how can we use natural systems to be able to have rainwater go into, in this case, on the right, you can see all the rainwater goes into a bioswale. Here it was just planted, but if you go there today, it's just all lush and beautiful. And then on the left side is the creek there in AG, and restoration for that element as well, so that it functions better and is more adapted to the native habitat.
This is an example of sort of understanding the history of place and how that might be incorporated into ongoing habitation of it, human habitation. This is an area just outside of London that a couple hundred years ago had been developed as an ironworks. It was a heavily industrial area, let's say. And in the last 10 or 20 years, it's really become evident that it's ripe for redevelopment. There was a large project planned that was not sensitive to the local sort of history and population needs. And it wasn't able to sustain support. As it fell away, a local group, a design working group developed out of the artists and local residents that developed sort of, they call them golden threads, to help guide any redevelopment project in a way that would connect it to the history of the area. So there's local participation and there's sort of that historical element. And what they have been able to sort of co-develop with this overarching project group that uses a variety of architects. Among the golden threads that they identified was a historically relevant architectural style where buildings are built around interior courtyards. And so the broader development will include 10 of these sort of courtyard buildings for housing. In addition, they have singled out a few of the historic buildings from the ironworks phase and will retain them as community spaces in one place, in one instance, where there's co-working space and a community canteen. And then another building, a historical building, the workshop, will become a maker space. And this was really important for local artists and crafters to be able to have that connection to their history, keep some of the historical buildings, but move forward with sort of the current society and community's needs. I thought it was a really nice way to see how understanding place can guide design and bring better outcomes for everybody involved. When we think of place, we often think of, well, what grows there, right? We're all pretty familiar with, landscaping practice, low impact development practices. On the left, this is an image from, I guess my label isn't great there, the Smart Cities webinar I recently attended. And it's showing how urban sort of green spaces have a variety of impacts and benefits for local populations, including mitigating against heat island, providing recreation, and promoting biodiversity. And there's a lot written on sort of urban planning that includes green space and the benefits both for the ecology and for human inhabitants. Urban agriculture, with urban agriculture, a variety of economic and social challenges can also be addressed. And on the right, there's an interesting experimental concept developed as part of a design challenge in Ireland. It posited converting unused parking garage space um, um, and converting it into productive agriculture in an urban center. So the rooftop would be reserved for sort of hardy plants and greens that can be exposed. And then higher value, more sensitive plants like microgreens would be grown in planters, ringing the lower levels of the parking garage. And then at the bottom level, there would be processing space for these the agricultural products, as well as retail space and perhaps restaurants, community engagement with the space in the parking lot. And parking is retained. It was just sort of an underused space, and so they're finding ways to fill it and add value for the local community and the economy.
I love that one.
Yeah, cool, right?
Right? There's still some parking. It's just
Yeah.
it was overparked. So that's great. So, and then kind of wrapping up the conversation about place is just the foundational concepts of city planning, which we may or may not have as much access to, but we can certainly influence, with the idea here being you can make a super sustainable building in project boundary with all your carbon sequestration and drought tolerant landscape, but the project itself may still increase traffic, displace residents, or be out of scale with its neighbors. So with that in mind, that there are lots of resources now that are really focused at that larger scale for planners, landscape architects. And according to a recent Rocky Mountain Institute study, 83% of a building's emissions are locked in at the planning stage. So reinforcing that point that where you build and what its access is. And so much of that is tied to the embodied carbon that comes from the infrastructure. So if you're building out someplace, then your project is saddled with the emissions of the roads and the stormwater and the electricity lines and all the operational getting the cars out there in the first place. So working towards the examination of our infrastructure. And of course, there's lots of ways and tools, and we know about so many of them. But one particular example here is this Livable Communities Initiative in Los Angeles. And they're just going around reimagining, right? So this is a real street on the left. I think it's Pico, actually. I didn't get a chance to circle back. But you can see on the right, it's the same cars. It's that same street, that same width. And they've just reimagined it with the density and the bike lanes and the walkability and the parklets, outdoor seating, and of course, fully grown trees at that point. But this is not, super high cost in and of itself. So these are just concepts that can be developed within our infill opportunities.
So that was sort of some components having to do with place. We're going to shift to community elements of regenerative design. Let's take a look at equity. This is a program, well, let's say part of what regenerative design aims to foster is a just place for people. We mentioned that in sort of that diagram earlier on. And obviously there are a lot of ways to approach this. Living Future includes equity as one of its petals. And they also have what they call the JUST program, which offers organizations a framework for evaluating their own culture, practices, and policies regarding employees and the surrounding community. So IBGC, our firm, Imbalance, is actually in the process of getting a JUST certification. It involves a self-assessment against some standard thresholds, and you'll see that there's sort of 1 to 4 blue blocks that you can rate yourself depending on where you land on the thresholds in the standard. And just to sort of draw out some of what they focus on here and think about in terms of equity, this certification includes or addresses diversity and inclusion practices. It has organizations look at their compensation and benefit policies. There are health components, and then sort of stewardship having to do with community involvement, volunteerism, philanthropy. They do have a running compilation or directory of organizations that have just certifications. And more than anything, it's an exercise in transparency. So self-reflection at the organizational level, and then also community building. What are other communities doing to get 3 blocks or 4 blocks, and who else is working in this space? It's a nice way to sort of connect and build on the principles involved in this sort of framework for equitable thinking and practice. Um, Community can also mean sort of assessing stakeholder involvement in a project, and I thought that this was an interesting way to illustrate one way to do that. In just outside of Copenhagen, north of Copenhagen, there's an area called Nordhaven, which historically has been an industrial port area. You can see on the left there in the gray, there's sort of, you can see it slowly building the landmass as it fills in for the port operations. And there are a couple thousand people who live there, but it was recently designated by I think the Copenhagen government as a prime redevelopment area, and they decided to designate it as a 5-minute city. So we've heard of 10-minute cities, and there are quite a few of them around the world, but as a 5-minute city, they were really trying to push that limit, having all services and conveniences available, or necessities available for residents within a 5-minute walk. And it's very much a walk and bicycling forward sort of community. And so they are anticipating a tenfold increase in population, and they wanted to, in the process of building it out, also take into account, well, what's valued in terms of wildness and nature and recreation. And the approach they took was to have 2 formats for residents to sort of send their input and their observations to a project team based at the University of Copenhagen. So they had what's called public participatory GIS, where they allowed people to walk around and they tracked where they marked that they liked a place or disliked a place. And then they also have an app where people could go to where they wanted to make a comment, take a photo, do a voice message. They compiled all this data and mapped it onto those places in the existing land where people liked what they saw or didn't like what they saw, so that they could sort of retain what they wanted and build out more of what the future community wanted in the space that they would have. Overall, they had over 3,000 participants, over 20,000 annotated geopoints. So these are the data points that they could work with. And like beyond all of the other sort of categories, wild nature was sort of wildly popular. And they had to define it and refine it. But out of that, they decided that they would develop these sort of principles for guiding the future development. So incorporate measures such as perceived biodiversity, and and use that as a basis for developing green spaces, making sure that green spaces, whether they're messy or wild, are accessible. And you can read through these, but I thought it was a great example for using sort of current technology to get data from folks that cared about the project on their own time, and then compile it with AI and have an outcome that guides the future of the design. Another way to involve community in a regenerative design sort of process is using maybe new technologies or techniques in your project, and having opportunities for locals to train on being able to provide those services. So not only do they participate in a project, but then they're able to carry those skills forward into additional projects. These are just a couple of examples where on a project in England, they wanted to use wood fiber exterior insulation and a lime plaster, but didn't have a lot of local tradespeople that knew how to do it. So part of their project program was to have training sessions so that local tradespeople could participate and complete the project, but then also carry it forward into as a new sort of building method in the community. More locally, we recently participated in the Girls Build Summer Academy at Cal Poly. Chloe's smiling. She participated in that with us. Where the participants were given some bio-based insulation materials and taught their properties and a little bit of building science, and then they got to get their hands dirty, so to speak, practicing the installation themselves.
This is a project by Audrey Development. Anya Lehalova set up this development firm to be equity centered. And so here in this project in Portland, Oregon, it was a neighborhood that had suffered from the redlining, the discriminatory lending practices of the prior decade. And so, but there was still a thriving economy of folks from diverse ethnic and cultural backgrounds. And they wanted to get together and kind of lift up the potential for economic development as a group. So the Native American, Black American, Hispanic, and Philippine American chambers of commerce all got together and developed this community economic coalition, and with a centered within that space. So it's still being developed. And then while they're going for this project economically, there was also an alignment with environmental stewardship and using mass timber construction in innovative ways. So pretty cool project. All right, so that was community and place, and we'll get into net positive energy and water. We won't spend a lot of time on this because all of our other webinars are really focused on energy. But again, if you have ideas, projects, references that you want to drop into the chat for the things that we've already talked about, please feel free to do that and share. So this particular project that's on the cover here is by ArcNexus. It's in Sacramento, and this was a firm that really wanted to embrace kind of the net zero or net positive principles. And so their job one was finding an existing building to rehab, and so in a walkable neighborhood. And so they've been able to reduce their energy footprint, put on the renewable energy, and even have a net zero water, which is super impressive in California.
And Andy, you know what? I'm noticing we don't have it noted here, but it actually is a certified living building. And it was the
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Michelle. That's right. So there's a good case studies on it. So the net positive energy is relatively straightforward in that you use a building that doesn't use very much energy, and then it needs to be all electric, right? Because the fossil fuels are necessarily not regenerative. And then you have enough renewable energy and storage systems to be able to support that use. So here's just a couple of examples. This is in San Luis Obispo. People's Self-Help Housing Office. It's LEED certified silver. And they, one of the things that I thought was really clever about this design is that they really prioritized a clear roof to be able to put as many PVs on there as they could. So there's no parapets, so it doesn't shade. It's a relatively low slope, so they still kind of have a clean architectural look that they were looking for. And then that top right are the heat pumps for the heating and cooling of the system. And they're in a kind of a storage utility area on the ground floor. So the equipment on the roof is really just some of the, plumbing vents, and then otherwise a massive array of PVs. And so what that does for them is they're fully grid tied. This particular project is a few years old and finished a few years ago. And so they don't have batteries. I think they'd like to add batteries when they can. But for right now, they're subject to all the peaks of being just a regular grid tied system. So they use more energy than they have available in the winter, but then they overgenerate in the summer. And in fact, they're over-generating right now because they set themselves up to be able to have EV charging. But a lot of folks aren't coming into the office still. So that's been a little bit of a change in dynamic. So they're building back up to it. This is another cool building. in Boston, so different climate, a lot colder. And so an existing warehouse with an addition and a couple of the things that that design team talked about that were important to the success of the project was a really tight envelope. And they did blower door testing at a couple of different milestones along the way, and it wasn't hitting the targets that they were looking for. So they were able to work with a builder and go back through and really identify where the envelope was leaking. And what that did was it lowered their energy bills and improved the comfort. With the lower energy bills, the PV array was able to stay at the kind of a relatively small size for a big building to be able to have the net positive in that case. Their other piece was just the user education about roll-up doors and making sure folks are using the building efficiently. For net positive water, again, relatively straightforward in that we're using water efficiently. We're trying to capture water that arrives on site, reuse the water that we have, either passively to gardens or actively being treated. And then in general, restoring the natural water systems. In this case, on the right is a little bioswale, so it flows from the parking lot into a natural plant and into the aquifer. So this is a project called the Campbell Collective. It's itty bitty, kind of the humble project of a home and a little guest area. And they use it as a community house, and they collect the rainwater into cisterns. And they even captured rainwater that was running down the street because they were able to save it into tanks and water their trees with it. So they have a laundry to landscape, so laundry water goes out there. And they also have an atmospheric water system so that this device on the right, the kind of piece of equipment is actually taking water from the atmosphere to generate more water. Usually you see that used in kind of more extreme climates where they're absolutely needing that. But in this case, they were trying to be net zero water, but it uses electricity. So they make sure that it aligns with the time of use that their solar panels are active and have energy available. At a larger scale, this is a project in Santa Barbara where it's a commercial use, but it's a project similar to hospitality where there's a lot of laundry. And so we worked with this team to be able to calculate all the water sources, opportunity for gray water and what their uses are. And after looking at different options and rainwater collection versus gray water, it looks like the landscape demand is about aligned with the laundry water, wastewater that's generated. So that was the system we ended up with. There's laundry machines, 4 of them, and we put ozone machines, ozone generation into the water system, and that reduces the chemicals that are needed, and it allows for cold water washing. So that's better for the plants. There's all kinds of bypasses and overflows and makeup water opportunities, but you can see it's kind of a straightforward system of tanks and filters and treatment, and then we irrigate with it.
So that brings us to our 4th sort of component, group of practices with regenerative design having to do with materials. And materials hold an interesting place at the nexus of multiple important concepts in regenerative design. If you'll recall those 7 categories that we talked about early on with the Living Building Challenge framework, a lot of them are going to overlap and the lines between them blur. Materials is one of those. So the materials that you select can reduce carbon emissions, for instance, which is a good ancestor practice. They can promote local and circular economies and help the project sort of promote co-evolving with nature. They can also foster a sense of belonging and well-being, which is a real focus on people. So all 3 of those sort of practice categories in the graphic there pertain to materials, and we're going to just look at a couple of them. bio-based materials as a broad category have been around for a long time. And most of us are familiar with maybe straw bale or adobe brick or even recycled denim insulation, which are all bio-based materials. Generally speaking, the industry suffered from scalability, but that's rapidly changing as the technology to scale improves and the benefits become more and more salient to a broader economy. Here you can see sort of this fantastical building here. It's actually made out of mycelium, so fungus, which is one of the materials that you're going to be hearing a lot about. If we want to just define what is a bio-based material, it's from a renewable resource, usually a fiber, a sugar, a microorganism, or a protein. And the benefits associated with using bio-based materials include carbon storage and sequestration. We think mass timber is the most common, right? Lower greenhouse gas emissions during the production and transportation. They are renewable and by definition biodegradable. They often are made up of residual waste streams. If we think of, you know, hemp plant components going into a hempcrete, or what else am I thinking? Denim,
Straw bale.
straw bale, right?
Yeah.
And so there's sort of a built-in circularity to some of these materials, and they're generally less toxic and have fewer VOCs, which promotes better indoor air quality, right, and planetary health. And that's just a quick graphic. You can see in the next 10, 12 years, the anticipated market for these materials is rapid growth. It's, I think, almost 20% annual growth year over year. So it seems that people in the sector think that the time has come for bio-based materials. Some fun examples, if you're wondering, well, how do we get into using bio-based materials? What are they? What do they do? Some sources on the left, you can see the ones you expect, like wood and bamboo and hemp, but also mycelium and seaweed, coconut, some different grasses. And what they can do for buildings is also developing rapidly. We are familiar with interior finishes, but new finishes are coming onto the market with new materials. So in the lower right, you'll see that kind of greenish square. That's from the Seacork website. They're producing acoustic tiles made out of seaweed and a binder. And it comes out of an area outside of Vancouver where they have too much seaweed. So they're having to harvest it anyway, and this is a way for them to use it in a productive material. Cladding opportunities. This is just one example where it's actually bark that's used as a cladding. It doesn't get much more bio than that, right? Insulation, maybe most of us are familiar with some insulation options. Hemp wool, bats, and panels. Also, cork is popular in some areas of the country. And then at the bottom, there's mycelium, which is a fungus grown special to be in an insulated panel. And then more recently, structural materials have come on to the market where you've got mycelium bricks. And this is an example of an OSB structural panel made from perennial grasses, another waste stream. And these are just a couple of examples, really. Another thing I wanted to sort of touch on in terms of materials and their role in regenerative design is we like shiny things in front of us that look beautiful, right? And why not put them in the project? But a core concept in regenerative design is thinking about sufficiency and how much is enough. So sufficiency-based design focuses on meeting human needs, you know, with sort of the minimum necessary resources and prioritizing ecological limits and social well-being equally. So instead of sort of ornate built out spaces, how much do we need to have the space function the way we want it to? There are applications in engineering in terms of, you know, engineering to the extent needed for structure and safety. Architecture in terms of interior design flourishes. How fancy does it need to be? And even product manufacturing, you know, how much, you know, waterproof coating do we really need for our shoes, or can we get by with a simple canvas sneaker with less toxins? Some strategies at the project level might include, you know, designing for durability, repairability, reuse, and selecting materials that have sort of a closed loop element to the production and use. A lot of projects might think about moving from providing products to services. So the shared cars, the scooters, the tools that you might just use infrequently and could easily be shared with a broader community. Then I won't go into it too much just in terms of time, but biomimicry and biophilic design both have a role in supporting this approach as well in terms of learning from how nature provides and functions in a way that doesn't have a lot of added on resources and unnecessary waste. I'm going to touch on biophilic design briefly, and then we'll get to our case studies. Some of you might be familiar with biophilic design, popularized by E.O. Wilson. Defining it, it comes out of this principle that humans have an innate tendency to focus on life and lifelike processes, and then using that idea to inform design. So biophilic design might be defined as applying biophilia to the design and development of the human built environment. This project here on the left is the Singapore airport. And it's a great example of one of the three. There are a lot of ways to break down what is biophilic design. One of the most popular comes from out of Stephen Kellert, where he breaks it into three broad categories. The first being direct experience of nature. So here, the Shanghai or the Singapore airport takes it to the extreme, right? Where you've got just massive amounts of plants and water and real nature in the built environment. On the lower, below that, you'll see a school that built in sort of a way for when there's rainwater outside for it to flow through the floor of the school and sort of have a way for students inside the building to access that natural function happening. That's one category. A second category is indirect experience of nature. So bringing in patterns, colors, textures that evoke nature. You can see them in the patio here, in the paneling, and even in tiles that might have waves or other patterns that evoke the nature outside. And the third broad category is more of a spatial relations category, thinking about the space and the place. So one commonly used strategy is prospect and refuge, where the human desire to have a space, a safe place from which to look out on the world is integrated into this design in a clever way of this office building on the east coast of the US. And yeah, so I'm going to move on here to some of the case studies. If there are questions about that, we can take them in the chat. Do we want to pause, Chloe? Have people caught up with us with questions that we want to address before we go into the case studies?
We haven't got any questions in the chat yet, but if people have anything to add or any questions, now would be a good time, or feel free to add them to the chat and we can get to them as we keep going.
Thank you. All right, so we've got just two case studies, and then we'll talk a little bit about, what's next for folks that want to integrate regenerative design thinking into your practice. The first case study that brings together a bunch of these components that we're talking about is the Brattleboro Food Co-op. So this is a food co-op in Vermont that was considering expansion and renewal of their physical space, the building. They were interested in LEED certification and sustainability broadly. The project team, ultimately designed a building and landscape with a lot of great green building features. The triple glazed windows, a green roof, low carbon and recycled finishes, PV production, and low impact development landscape strategies. And by all accounts, it's a great green sustainable project. But then it got interesting because they actually took it upon themselves to think a little bit broader, doing a place-based analysis of the surrounding area. They really identified a variety of issues that were also important to them beyond this green building project. As a food outlet, they noticed that their food was sourced from 1,500 miles away on average, local farmland was being depleted, and the farming population was aging. So the local agricultural community was sort of dying away. Um, the co-op was vulnerable because of this to supply chain disruptions from crop failure, the fuel prices for transporting the food to their store, and then even trucker strikes. So, social action that might happen. And there were rumors of a large chain, to remain unnamed, opening in the area. So this was sort of an economic challenge as well. And they realized, this is a quote from one of the folks in the planning on the co-op board of directors. They realized that an energy efficient building wasn't going to solve these problems. So the best green building wasn't good enough. And so the question became, what contribution could this place make to the regeneration of the larger system within which the project was embedded? And what value adding role could the organization play in order to help the place realize the potential that they saw? What they came up with was a project that is guided by a 100-year plan, which focuses on growing the local agricultural capacity. So addressing that problem sort of outside the boundary of the red line boundary of their project. They developed a cooperative of co-ops, basically, with a couple dozen other co-ops in the region to share strategies and resources. They actually turned the upper floors of the building that they had designed into residential apartments. They have solar panels and heating systems that recycle heat produced by the refrigeration in the store and distribute it to other areas of their building. And then they brought the community into their space. There's youth education programs, cooking classes, teaching agriculture to the next generation, and providing maker spaces and display spaces so that it's a vibrant community and space for everyone that has a stake in its success. And I thought it was just a great way to, a lot of those components were brought together into one project. Andy is going to walk us through another one.
This is the Living Places project in Copenhagen, Denmark, Healthy Homes for People and Planet. It's a temporary installation with Velux, the skylight company, being the lead supporter. After they built this project, they invited teams from different parts of the world to come and stay in the project to learn about it and to be able to record what the experience of living in it would be. So myself and a couple others from our area were able to go here last summer and experience it in person. The project takes the premise that people are kind of being shuttled away from planet, which is unhealthy for a lot of different reasons. And what if we could figure out a way to have people and planet work together more cohesively? So it takes an abandoned industrial site. It's Denmark, so it's still on a bike path. It's amazing. But this industrial building on the left had this kind of rundown area that wasn't being used. And so they wanted to go ahead and have a temporary installation. So they built up these buildings. Two of them are occupiable as they are. The other four are kind of meeting spaces and demonstration buildings. And it's set up on a walkway. So it actually has a very light footprint on the land underneath. And then it is dotted with landscaped areas and gardens for food production. So that's within kind of that general place category. Thinking about community, they're very intentional about the size and looked at kind of the typical density on the left, and then the active communities on the right, where people can have different family formats. And so these buildings, the prototype building can be 1, 2, or 3 stories, so it can house one family or multiple families, single folks, whatever the capacity is. And then this graph down at the bottom, confusingly, it's swapped with the actual diagram. So On the left, the low bar, that's the environmental impact in CO2 per person per year, showing that the living places model is a 77% reduction. The next one is land use and being able to, what's the kind of the square footage per person? Again, a 67% reduction per standard. And then the actual density of 36 people compared to 12 in that same amount of space. So, and delightful, right? It's just like enjoyable community, a way to be with each other, but still have your own space. In that kind of energy and daylight, again, it was a Velux product, so that they really wanted to test how well a building could perform without any insertion of energy at all. And so other than the little energy that's required to motorize these skylights and windows, so they automatically open based on CO2, based on thermal comfort, and there's shades that go for both glare control and thermal control. And then the entire plan is kind of not only has kind of an open for that stack effect, but there's even kind of a cross ventilation that goes up, over, and around, so that you have an air movement throughout the space. It was truly delightful to be in that space, I felt like. And then in terms of materials, they were really thoughtful about the carbon footprint. Again, that idea of sufficiency, that the wood framing and structural materials ended up becoming the finishes. They used stick construction for one and cross-laminated timber for the other house, and compared their carbon footprint on each, so that it was kind of a living laboratory. And they even, in their effort to minimize the use of concrete, there's still some concrete, but very little. And they used, one of the big strategies there was screw pile foundation. So it screws into the earth as the foundation rather than pouring baked footing. So a lighter physical footprint into the earth and a lower embodied carbon as well. So pretty cool project. So those are the kind of like the specific components of what we're seeing with regenerative design, and thinking about process, what's next, how do you incorporate it? Here are just 10 ideas that the AIA regenerative design guidelines came. Again, a lot of words. I'm just going to kind of highlight a few of the pieces that we're looking at. So there's a lot of conversation, of course, that you're seeing the theme about place and listening, observing to truly understand a place, and that diagram of the permeability of, it's not just our red dotted line, this is our boundary. What's the bigger piece? The Brattleboro store that Michelle shared, it was when the architect was brought on to consider the project, where they're like, oh, we want to do green building. And then the architect and team, and they were starting to look at, holding up the produce, like, it comes from Brazil, what are we doing here, what are the big goals? And that kind of just opened up this whole conversation. So we have a role in being able to understand the current needs of the place and the historic one. So value adding role for the project, so that you're bringing people together, identifying goals together, and then and understanding your metrics. What is it that makes this would make this project a success? Again, that Brattleboro energy efficient isn't going to do it. So let's think bigger. Co-design with nature. I love the bio-based materials and how it interfaces with biophilic design, that these are all kind of knitted together in a way that is exciting, that's going to feel really good. So we have a lot of the design heaviness, that there's climate change, and we're doing what we can to just kind of like struggle to keep ahead of it. And in this one, we're kind of coming almost from the other direction of healing and health, and just being in environments that feel wonderful and being a part of a community. The AIA suggests not stretching too far. You can't kind of do everything at once and still sustain yourself. So change should be achievable. So you don't want to lose momentum. And then be kind of that person who's out there in the field with optimism, energy, excitement about the potential of the project. You're not going to, we're not going to be able to get everything on every first project. But if we can learn as we go, and then the next project will continue to build from those lessons learned.
We're spiraling our way up.
We're spiraling our way. So that's our pitch for this project. And as we go into our closing slides, that we just want to emphasize: enjoy the process, and we'll be able to after Chloe goes through some of our closing, we'll open it up for hopefully a little collaboration and feedback and ideas.
Thank you so much, Andy and Michelle. That was really interesting. And I'm really looking forward to questions from the audience. I know I have some questions for you guys. But before we get to that, I'm going to quickly go over some of our closing materials here. You are going to be getting link to this recording as well as the slides in your inbox in the next few days, so keep an eye out for that. You also should be getting an email that has it's like an attendance certificate for your ZNCD learning units. This is the first time we've done this, so if you guys don't get that in your inbox by maybe next Thursday, let me know if you need it and we will figure that out for you guys. But you should be getting that to your inbox. We also have some exciting courses coming up. I have a few listed out here, and as always, you can find the rest of them on our website, 3c-ren.org/events. And I'll highlight this next generation passive solar we have coming up in August. That's an in-person event for anyone local to Santa Barbara or willing to make the trek. It should be a lot of fun. We'll have Imbalance joining us for that event as well. And
that
yeah.
one is also Zero Net Carbon Design qualifying.
Yes, thank you, Andy. That one also will qualify. Okay, I think that's it for me. Oh, as in Code Coach. Thank you. This is going to be a reminder for folks who know about our Code Coach program, and maybe a few of you, this could be a new resource. 3C-REN offers a free code coaching service. We can answer questions about the Energy Code, Title 24, Part 6, or Part 11. We have experts with Imbalance Green Consulting who truly are experts in this field. They'll get into the weeds and know all of the code better than I do, better than almost anyone does. So if you have any questions, please email them, call them, and they can help you out with that. And with that, we can pass it on to questions.
Terrific. So stop sharing, and hopefully some folks won't be too shy to, you can also raise your hand or just unmute and let us know your both either questions or just comments, like any feedback. I have a little bit of newer material. So.
And feel free to add any questions to the chat as well. I have a question we can start off with, maybe get the ball rolling. Michelle, I thought the case study you presented on was really interesting. It touches on, I think, kind of an important distinction between renovations or even just building practices that look sustainable and those that really address the sustainability needs of the building and of the area. And I'm curious how you guys and maybe some people in the audience can chime in as well, is how do you help your clients work through that decision-making process to identify what changes they need to make that will actually serve their needs? When sometimes I think clients want to go with what's going to make them look the most sustainable, which sometimes is like the cork flooring that maybe isn't actually going to be like the root of their sustainability problems.
I'm happy to jump in, but Andy, if you have thoughts as well. I think construction is expensive. And I think that when people approach a project, money is on the top of their mind, and it's a pressing, important consideration that often directs the rest of the conversation. So I think part of it is helping the project team, yes, address the immediate needs of schedule and money, but taking the opportunities and setting an expectation that will take a breath and at least give everybody a chance to think about, well, what beyond. If we get everything we want and that we're envisioning in the material and the economic outcome here, is that enough? Is there something more that we're trying to achieve with a project? And each client is going to bring sort of a different capacity to think through that, to be open to that, and you have to be responsive. You can't drag someone through a regenerative design process. It is a participatory process, right? But creating the opportunities and the possibilities to take that breath, to think about it, to sort of expand that red line boundary and identify what else is important is a really important first step. We didn't have it on the slide ultimately, but in the what next section of our slides, our first thing that came to our mind as we were brainstorming is allow yourself to shift your mindset. And so as practitioners, we might be on the front lines of that and then helping the people that we work with, whether they're clients or tradespeople or other design professionals, to also kind of come into that more expanded mindset or shifted mindset, I think is kind of a really important starting point. And Andy, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's I think you're right. I think that's great. I think one of the just like super straightforward tools that we use is working through a checklist with the clients. So depending on the project, it might be a LEED checklist, it might be a living building checklist, might be Greenpoint rated. But by going through relatively quickly, like an hour team meeting, and exposing clients to a variety of strategies and see what kind of, where their eyes light up. Like a lot of times we'll find biophilic design that they like, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing, or I knew that was a thing, I didn't know it had a name. And so then maybe we'll end up with another session where we have a focused work session on biophilia and what that could look like and how it could apply to their project. So I think the checklist is a good kind of scaffold, a framework for people to be able to go, that one's not singing to me right now, but glad to know about it. And like, oh, that could really be a fit. Like water, we are all about water and what could we do there? So, yeah.
Yeah, Andy, that makes me, if I can just add on, that makes me think of the project that you presented with the gray water system. That sort of concept came out of walking the site. It's an existing building site that was going to be partially demoed and rebuilt as a campus. And walking the site and seeing the current operations gave us the opportunity to identify, well, how does it work now? And how do you want it to work in the future? At the time, it did not have extensive landscaping, but that was something that they wanted in the end project. And so trying to figure out how that could happen within the resources available, then also got conversations started. I don't think any of us went into that project thinking, oh, we're going to have an extensive gray water system built on the back of their laundry operations, but it landed there, and I think to everybody's benefit, the communities, the project owners as well.
Great. Let's see. We got a great question from Natalie about what kind of education is required to be working in sustainability. And Michelle and I come at this from totally different directions. So my background, I'm a licensed architect and so practiced regular architecture, but have always had an interest in green building and sustainability. And so about 20 years ago, took the exam to be a LEED accredited professional. Michelle, do you want to share your?
Sure. Always wanted to be an architect. My first career path was wildly different. I was a Middle East consultant, traveled the world, speak Arabic. And then about 20 years ago, I was ready for a second career and remembered how much I love architecture, and decided to take the path of building on my consulting skills, and developing sort of construction knowledge and sustainable design knowledge through a couple of smaller certificate programs, and then just getting involved and getting my feet wet. Meeting up with other sort of technically oriented practitioners to add to a practice of consulting, which is what we do now. So I don't come from a techie background, but avid learner in the process helped me get here.
Great. I see Linnea's hand is up.
Hi. I have a question. First of all, this is so interesting. Thank you so much.
Great.
I have a question about the Copenhagen case study.
Yeah.
I'm very, very passionate about community living and building regenerative communities. And I'm curious in the local projects that you work on with your clients, if you see a lot of interest in this, or if there's barriers in California, and especially like living in a more individualistic culture. Um, yeah, what is your experience with that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I just love the overall, where that leads us, right? So one of the things that I thought was really great about the Copenhagen project is that it didn't mandate what level of interaction people were going to have who were living there. It was set up in a way that would be create opportunity without requiring engagement necessarily, versus like a co-housing type of situation. One of the examples that we looked at, and you can't include everything, but it was a study that some big firms got together and did a study of what would it look like to renovate an office building into a kind of a co-housing situation where there was communal shared kitchen kind of in the core, and then the perimeter of this office building were converted to like little units, almost like a single room occupancy. So so it just to increase affordability. And so it did bring up kind of the question of like, who, would people want to live like that type of thing? So so I think that in our experience that there's a very small exposure that we've had with intentional co-living kinds of situations, but I think more likely would be development of communities that are using like a missing middle housing kind of model, a little bit more traditional. So it would create opportunity for community building without necessarily an intentional co-housing situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. The survey has launched. Thank you for that. I was thinking, Dane, if I could put you on the spot, you noted earlier that you're a builder remodeler and interested in regenerative homes, and I'm just wondering if you I'll let you slide if you're not available, but just wondering if you've had exposure from the builder perspective, like in terms of what regenerative might look like to you. I don't know, we maybe lost him already. Oh, there he is.
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey.
I guess that's kind of more like what I was trying to get a feel for with this, with the presentation, just to see, because I haven't seen, I guess, so my family background is in farming and construction. So I've got this marriage of ideas, this regenerative concept of something that I've been kind of playing with in my own head since childhood, and trying to find ways to better incorporate our use and reduce the abuse of the land around us. And I am not seeing a lot of the regenerative principles, if any, really coming into play, other than what I can manage to convince clients to do on the fly. The materials don't seem to quite be there yet. Certainly the suppliers are I don't know. The supply side needs a lot of help. The suppliers need to be brought on board with this concept because finding this stuff is prohibitively difficult, I guess.
Right.
Trying to get these products from whatever far-flung mom and pop is developing them to an
Right.
actual application in the field has proven quite difficult. And I don't mind going the extra mile to make that happen, but you got to convince a client to pay me the extra time to do that, the extra shipping charges, the extra delays, and you know the lack of understanding, spending time to coach them up. So it's evolving, and I'm hoping to be part of that evolving process and help to push it along. But as much as trying to get a read on the industry from this presentation and see what I'm glad that this is being talked about and being pushed, but trying to connect with folks that are interested in that and see if we can collaborate to try to help move the process forward. I guess in summary, my experience as a builder, the supply of these materials and processes has been a hindrance to actually executing and making them a viable pitch to customers.
Right.
So as
Yeah.
that continues to change, I'm looking forward to, and whatever I can do to contribute to that, I'm happy to.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks. I appreciate that feedback. I know that we're finding that as well. And sometimes I wonder if maybe there would be a like organizationally um a focus on fewer products that we all kind of agree are ready for the market, and we collectively will support a supplier who can bring them in here. Kind of, even just like heat pump water heaters, 8 years ago, like people were like, well, where do we get them? And now there's just like gazillion on the market, right? There's just kind of this wave of frustration when it's not quite there, and then suddenly it's all here. But there will not all products are going to be ready for that. So yeah,
Right,
no,
right.
thank you, Dane. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you almost
Um,
want, how in a conventional grocery store you might go and there's an organic section, right? You almost want like the Home Depot or the builder supply stores to have a section where you've got the bio-based materials, or you've got a sample of a hemp wall or a straw bale wall panel, so that there's a little bit easier accessibility and entry point at it. But I like the cooperative
yeah,
approach as well, having a community sort of approach to support it.
right. I know we're kind of coming up on time. If people have to drop off, we thank you for your participation. We'll linger on just a little bit longer, and if anybody else has comments, but we want to make sure we honor everybody's time this morning. A great comment from Brian. Really appreciate that about missing middle and the urban scale, and gosh, just that 5-minute city versus a 15-minute city, and being able to put all those things with a density that is going to work for kind of non-car options serves us well. So absolutely. Any other last comments? Somebody asked, we will get the presentation slides coming soon. Yep. Thanks, Jim Duffy, for being here. And anybody else? All right.
If we don't have any other questions, we can maybe end things here. Thanks so much to everyone for coming. And if you have any additional thoughts on this or questions or anything that you want to contribute, we are always available. You can reach out to us over email. Our surveys are a great way to give us your feedback, and we're always looking for new ideas for courses and talks. So let us know what you think and what you want to hear from. All right. Thanks so much, Michelle. Thanks, Andy. We'll see you guys next time.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
See you.